What would you do if you discovered something that could destroy everything you believed in? What if that discovery came from the most unexpected place, found by the most unlikely person? Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look where others dare not glance. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a night security guard whose routine check would uncover secrets that reached the very top of power. It's a story about courage in the face of impossible odds, about ordinary people who find themselves holding extraordinary truths, and about how one man's dedication to doing what's right changed everything. In a world where loyalty is bought, trust is rare, and power corrupts absolutely, sometimes it takes someone from the shadows to bring light to the darkness. This is that story. Marcus Chen had been walking these same hallways for 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. He knew, because he counted. Not out of boredom, but out of habit. The kind of habit that develops when your job requires absolute attention to detail, when the smallest oversight could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. The Meridian Government Complex stood like a fortress in the heart of the capital city, its glass and steel structure reaching 37 floors into the sky. By day, it buzzed with the activity of thousands of civil servants, politicians, and visitors. By night, it belonged to people like Marcus, the security guards who moved through its corridors like ghosts, protecting secrets that could shake nations. Marcus wasn't supposed to be working that Tuesday night in October. His colleague, James Rodriguez, had called in sick with what he claimed was food poisoning. Marcus suspected it had more to do with the baseball playoffs, but he didn't mind picking up the extra shift. The overtime pay would help with his daughter's college tuition, and besides, he knew the building better than most people knew their own homes. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried him to the 35th floor. This was the executive level, where the most powerful people in the government had their offices. During the day, this floor was restricted to only those with the highest security clearances. At night, it was Marcus's domain to patrol and protect. His route was always the same. Start at the East Wing, work his way through the maze of executive offices, conference rooms, and private chambers, then circle back through the West Wing. Each door had to be checked, each window examined, every shadow investigated. It was methodical work, the kind that could numb your mind if you let it. But Marcus never let it. His father had been a police officer for 30 togethers before retiring, and he had taught Marcus that vigilance wasn't just about staying awake, it was about staying alert, staying curious, staying ready for the unexpected. The East Wing was quiet, as always. Marcus's footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors as he moved from office to office. The mayor's chief of staff's office was secure. The deputy administrator's conference room showed no signs of disturbance. The financial oversight director's private office was locked tight, exactly as it should be. It was when he reached the center of the floor that Marcus first noticed something was different. The door to the executive wardrobe room was slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to let a thin line of light escape into the darkened hallway. Marcus stopped and pulled out his flashlight, even though he knew the hallway lighting by heart. The executive wardrobe room wasn't really a room at all. It was more like a large closet where the government's highest officials kept their formal attire for state functions, important meetings, and ceremonial events. Most people would never even know it existed, tucked away as it was behind an unmarked door that looked like it might lead to a janitor's closet. Marcus approached the door carefully. His training had taught him that unexpected changes in routine often meant trouble. A door that should be closed but wasn't. A light that should be off but was on. These were the details that separated good security guards from great ones, and Marcus had always prided himself on being great. He pressed his ear to the door first, listening for any sounds from inside. Nothing. No voices, no movement, no indication that anyone was in there. But the light was definitely on, and that wasn't right. The wardrobe room should have been locked and dark, just like every other night for the past 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. Marcus pulled out his radio and considered calling for backup. Protocol dictated that any unusual situation should be reported immediately. But something held him back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the desire not to look foolish if this turned out to be nothing more than a maintenance worker who forgot to turn off the lights. He decided to investigate first, report second. Marcus gently pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a government wardrobe facility. Rows of hanging garments protected by clear plastic covers, shelves lined with accessories, and a few full-length mirrors for last-minute adjustments. Everything was organized with military precision. But something was wrong. Marcus could feel it in his gut, that same instinct that had served his father well during his police career. The room looked normal, but it felt different. He began to walk slowly along the rows of hanging clothes, his flashlight beam dancing across expensive suits, formal dresses, and ceremonial robes. That's when he saw it. Hanging at the far end of the room, separate from all the other garments, was an ornate robe that Marcus had never seen before. It was deep purple with gold threading, the kind of thing you might see in a museum or at a royal ceremony. But what caught his attention wasn't the robe itself. It was what was tucked inside one of its deep pockets. The corner of an envelope was visible, cream-colored paper that stood out against the rich purple fabric. Marcus looked around the room one more time, making sure he was alone, then approached the robe. His heart was beating faster now, though he couldn't quite say why. He reached out and carefully extracted the envelope from the pocket. It was heavy, expensive paper, and it was sealed with red wax that bore an official-looking stamp. The front of the envelope bore a single line of text, written in elegant script. For His Majesty's eyes only. His Majesty? There was no king in their democratic government. No royal family, no monarchy, no His Majesty of any kind. So what was this envelope, and why was it hidden in a robe in a government wardrobe room? He turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside was substantial. Documents, maybe photographs. Something important enough to require the most secure method of delivery. Something secret enough to be hidden in a place where no one would think to look. Marcus knew he should put the envelope back and report what he'd found to his supervisor. That was protocol. That was the safe thing to do. But something about the situation felt urgent, felt important, in a way he couldn't explain. His father had always told him that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. With trembling fingers, Marcus carefully broke the wax seal. Inside the envelope were photographs, dozens of them, each one more shocking than the last. They showed meetings between high-ranking government officials and people Marcus didn't recognize. Men in expensive suits shaking hands with officials he knew from newspaper photos. Documents being exchanged, briefcases changing hands. But it was the handwritten notes that made Marcus's blood run cold. Page after page of detailed plans, written in a careful script, outlining something that sounded like treason, plans to manipulate election results, schemes to funnel government money to private accounts, strategies for eliminating political opponents. And at the bottom of each page, a signature that Marcus recognized from countless official documents and news reports. The signature of the Prime Minister himself. Marcus's hands were shaking as he flipped through the photographs and documents. Each piece of evidence was more damning than the last. This wasn't just corruption. This was a conspiracy that reached the very highest levels of government. A conspiracy that would destroy the public's trust in their democratic institutions if it ever came to light. But who was His Majesty? Who was this mysterious figure that these powerful people were reporting to? And what was Marcus, a simple security guard making barely above minimum wage, supposed to do with information that could topple a government? He looked at his watch. It was 2:17 a.m. His shift wouldn't end for another 4 hours, and he still had 3 floors left to patrol. But Marcus knew that his life had just changed forever. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the simple routine of checking doors and windows. As he carefully placed the documents back in the envelope, Marcus noticed something else in the robe's pocket, a small digital recording device. no bigger than his thumb. His heart sank as he realized what this meant. If someone had been recording meetings, if there was audio evidence to go along with the photographs and documents, then this conspiracy was even bigger than he had imagined. Marcus Chen, night security guard, father of two, and believer in doing what was right, stood alone in a government wardrobe room at 2:18 a.m., holding evidence that could destroy lives, topple governments, and change history. The only question now was what he was going to do about it. The weight of the envelope in his hands felt like the weight of the world, and in many ways it was. Marcus spent the rest of his shift in a fog of disbelief and terror. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made him jump. He completed his rounds mechanically, checking doors and windows while his mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered. By the time 6 a.m. arrived, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't go to his supervisor. There was no way to know how high this conspiracy reached within the security company. He couldn't go to the police. Some of the photographs showed police commissioners in meetings with the conspirators, and he certainly couldn't go to any government officials, since they were the ones involved in the plot. As the morning shift arrived, and the building began to come alive with the bustle of another workday, Marcus clocked out and walked to his car with the envelope hidden inside his jacket. His hands were still shaking as he started the engine. The drive home took him through the heart of the city, past the monuments and government buildings that had always filled him with pride. Now they looked different to him, like elaborate facades hiding corruption and deceit. How many of the people he saw walking to work were part of this conspiracy? How many were innocent victims who had no idea their government had been sold to the highest bidder? Marcus lived in a small apartment on the east side of the city with his wife Sarah and their two children, Emma and David. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling long shifts to help make ends meet. Emma was 19 and in her second year of college, studying journalism with dreams of becoming an investigative reporter. David was 16, a quiet kid who spent most of his time reading and playing chess. When Marcus walked through the front door that morning, Sarah was already getting ready for her day shift. She looked up from her coffee and immediately noticed something was wrong. "Marcus, you look terrible. What happened?" Marcus wanted to tell her everything. Sarah had always been his closest confidant, the one person in the world he trusted completely. But looking at her kind face, thinking about their children sleeping peacefully in their beds, he realized that knowledge of this conspiracy would put his entire family in danger. "Just a long night," he said, forcing a smile. "James called in sick again, so I had to cover his route, too." Sarah studied his face for a moment, and Marcus could see that she didn't entirely believe him. After 17 years of marriage, she knew him too well, but she also knew when not to push, and this was one of those times. "Well, get some sleep. You look exhausted." Marcus kissed her goodbye and watched her leave for the hospital. Then he checked on Emma and David, both still asleep, both blissfully unaware that their father's world had just been turned upside down. Alone in the apartment, Marcus spread the contents of the envelope across his kitchen table. In the light of day, the evidence looked even more damning than it had in the wardrobe room. The photographs were crystal clear, showing faces he recognized from news broadcasts and government websites. The documents were detailed and specific, outlining plans that would steal millions from taxpayers and consolidate power in the hands of a few. But it was the audio recordings that truly terrified him. Marcus had found an old cassette player in David's room and carefully connected the digital device to it. What he heard over the next 2 hours made him understand the true scope of the conspiracy. Voices he recognized discussing bribes, vote manipulation, and something they called the Crown Protocol. According to the recordings, His Majesty wasn't a person at all. It was a code name for a shadow organization that had been infiltrating democratic governments around the world for decades. Their goal was simple: create the illusion of democracy while actually controlling everything from behind the scenes. Politicians would appear to compete for office, but the real decisions would be made by a council of wealthy individuals who had purchased their influence through a complex network of bribes, blackmail, and intimidation. The recordings revealed that the current prime minister hadn't won his election legitimately. Vote totals had been manipulated in key districts. Opposition candidates had been sabotaged, and media coverage had been carefully orchestrated to support the chosen candidate. The entire democratic process had been a carefully choreographed performance. Marcus felt sick to his stomach as he listened to familiar voices discussing these plans with casual indifference. These were people who had sworn oaths to serve the public, who appeared on television talking about honor and integrity, who attended church services and community events like ordinary citizens. But in private, they talked about the voters like sheep to be herded and democracy like a business to be managed. The most chilling recording came near the end of the collection. It was a conversation between the Prime Minister and someone identified only as the coordinator. They were discussing what they called problematic individuals, journalists, activists, and government employees who were getting too close to the truth. The reporter in District 7 is still asking questions about the voting irregularities, the Prime Minister's voice said through the static. That's been handled, replied the coordinator. She won't be asking questions much longer. And the accountant who noticed the discrepancies in the education budget, also handled. These problems have a way of solving themselves when people understand what's at stake. Marcus turned off the recorder, his heart pounding. Handled, and won't be asking questions much longer. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't just about corruption and election fraud. People who got too close to the truth were being silenced, possibly permanently. He thought about his daughter Emma, studying journalism, full of idealistic dreams about exposing corruption and serving the public good. What would happen to her if she stumbled onto a story like this? What would happen to any innocent person who accidentally discovered what Marcus had found? The weight of responsibility was crushing. Marcus wasn't a hero or a detective or a trained investigator. He was a security guard who had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding or capability. But he was also the only person who knew the truth, the only one who could do something about it. Marcus spent the day researching everyone mentioned in the documents and recordings. He used his computer to look up the officials involved, cross-referencing their public statements with their private actions as revealed in the evidence. The pattern was clear and consistent. Every single person involved in the conspiracy held positions of significant power and public trust. By evening, when his family returned home, Marcus had developed a plan. It was dangerous and probably foolish, but it was the only course of action he could see that had any chance of success. Emma bounced through the front door full of energy, chattering about her journalism classes and a story she was working on for the college newspaper. "Dad, you wouldn't believe how much corruption there is in local government. My professor says it's everywhere, but most people don't want to see it." Marcus looked at his daughter, bright, passionate, idealistic, and felt his resolve strengthen. This was why he had to act, not just for himself or even for his family, but for young people like Emma who still believed that truth mattered, that democracy worked, that good people could make a difference. "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "what would you do if you discovered evidence of corruption at the highest levels of government?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Are you kidding? I'd expose it. That's what journalists do. We shine a light on the darkness. Why?" "Just wondering about your ethics class discussions." But Sarah was watching him again with that knowing look, and Marcus realized he wasn't very good at hiding his feelings. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she confronted him directly. "Marcus Chen, I've been married to you for 17 years, and I know when you're lying. What happened at work last night?" Marcus looked into his wife's worried face and made another decision that would change everything. He told her the truth, all of it. He showed her the photographs, played her the recordings, and explained what he thought it all meant. Sarah listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each revelation. When Marcus finished, they sat in silence for several minutes. "My God," she finally whispered. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to do nothing," Marcus said firmly. "I am going to figure out how to get this information to someone who can act on it without getting our family killed." "Marcus, You can't do this alone. These people, if they're capable of what you think they're capable of, that's exactly why you and the children have to stay out of it. Sarah, I need you to promise me that no matter what happens, you'll protect Emma and David. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, Sarah said. But her voice was shaking. Marcus spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how an ordinary man could take on a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. He thought about his father, about the bedtime stories of police officers who stood up to corruption no matter the cost. He thought about Emma's faith in journalism and truth. He thought about David's quiet integrity and Sarah's unwavering support. By morning, Marcus Chen had decided to become something he'd never thought possible, a whistleblower who would risk everything to save the democracy his family believed in. The next few days were the longest of Marcus's life. He went through the motions of normal routine, working his security shifts, eating dinner with his family, helping David with his homework, while internally wrestling with how to expose the conspiracy without getting himself or his loved ones killed. The more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized how carefully he would have to proceed. The recordings had made it clear that people who got too close to the truth had a habit of disappearing or dying in convenient accidents. He couldn't just walk into a newspaper office or television station with his evidence. There was no way to know which journalists might be compromised, which editors might be part of the network, which news organizations might suppress the story to protect their own interests. Marcus needed to find someone he could trust completely, someone with the resources and credibility to handle this kind of explosive revelation. But how do you identify trustworthy people in a world where everyone might be compromised? The answer came to him during his Thursday night shift as he walked past a conference room where someone had left a newspaper on the table. The headline caught his attention. Independent journalist wins award for corruption investigation. The article was about Rebecca Martinez, a freelance investigative journalist who had spent 2 years exposing a major construction scandal involving several city council members. What struck Marcus wasn't just that she had broken the story, but how she had done it. Martinez had worked completely independently, refusing offers from major newspapers and television networks to maintain control over her investigation. She had funded her work through crowdsourcing and published her findings on an independent website before any mainstream media outlet picked up the story. Most importantly, the article mentioned that Martinez had previously exposed corruption cases where other journalists had been intimidated into silence. She had received death threats, been followed by unknown individuals, and had her home broken into during her investigation. But she had persisted, and her work had led to multiple arrests and convictions. Marcus spent his lunch break that night researching Rebecca Martinez online. What he found gave him hope for the first time since discovering the envelope. Martinez had built her reputation on exposing exactly the kind of high-level corruption that Marcus had uncovered. She had sources in government, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies. Most importantly, she had a track record of protecting whistleblowers and had never revealed a confidential source. But how could Marcus contact her without exposing himself? He couldn't use his home phone or computer. If the conspiracy was as sophisticated as the recording suggested, they might be monitoring communications. He couldn't meet her in public, and he couldn't risk sending the evidence through the mail. The solution came from an unexpected source: his 16-year-old son, David. That Friday evening, David was working on a school project about internet privacy and digital security. Marcus watched his son navigate through various online anonymity tools, explaining how people in authoritarian countries communicated safely with journalists and activists. "Dad, did you know there are ways to send messages that can't be traced back to you? And you can create email accounts that don't require any real information, and there are networks where your location can't be tracked. Show me how that works, son." Over the weekend, with David's unwitting help, Marcus learned how to communicate anonymously online. He created an untraceable email account and spent hours crafting a message to Rebecca Martinez. The message was carefully worded to avoid any details that might identify him, but specific enough to convince her that he had legitimate evidence of high-level corruption. The email simply said, "I am a government employee who has uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving election fraud, financial corruption, and threats against whistleblowers. The evidence includes photographs, documents, and audio recordings that implicate the Prime Minister and other high-ranking officials. I cannot reveal my identity due to safety concerns, but I can prove the authenticity of this evidence. If you are interested in pursuing this story, please respond with instructions for secure communication." Marcus sent the email on Monday morning from a public library computer, using the anonymity tools David had shown him. Then he went home and tried to act normal while waiting for a response. Rebecca Martinez replied within 6 hours. Her message was brief but professional. "Your claims are serious and require verification. If you have genuine evidence, I am willing to investigate. However, I need proof of authenticity before we proceed. Can you provide a sample of your evidence through secure channels?" Marcus had anticipated this request. Over the next 2 days, he carefully selected 3 photographs and 1 short audio clip that were dramatic enough to prove the legitimacy of his claims, but not so specific that they could be traced back to the wardrobe room discovery. Using the secure file transfer methods David had inadvertently taught him, Marcus sent the sample evidence to Martinez. Her response came quickly. "This is extraordinary. We need to meet in person. I understand your security concerns and will take appropriate precautions. Can you travel to Junction City this Saturday? There is a public library at 412 Oak Street B in the science fiction section at exactly 2 p.m. Wear a blue jacket and carry a copy of today's newspaper. I will identify myself." Junction City was 3 hours away by bus, far enough from home that Marcus was unlikely to be recognized by anyone. He told Sarah that he was taking a personal day to visit his cousin, a half-truth that made him feel guilty but seemed necessary for everyone's protection. The bus ride to Junction City gave Marcus time to think about what he was doing. He was about to meet with a journalist who would ask him to go on the record to expose himself as the source of information that could topple governments. Once he took this step, there would be no anonymity, no safety net, no way to protect his family from the consequences. But every time he considered backing out, Marcus thought about the recordings he'd heard, the casual way those powerful people had discussed manipulating elections and silencing opposition, the code-named operation that treated democracy like a business venture, the implied threats against anyone who got too close to the truth. If Marcus didn't act, who would? And if people like him, ordinary citizens who believed in honesty and justice, didn't stand up to corruption, then what hope was there for the democracy his children would inherit? Rebecca Martinez was exactly what Marcus had expected. Mid-40s, professional but not flashy, with the kind of intense eyes that suggested she had seen too much of humanity's darker side. She approached him in the library's science fiction section at exactly 2 p.m., identified herself quietly, and suggested they talk in her car. "Before we go any further," Martinez said as they settled into her sedan, "I need to know who you are and how you obtained this evidence. I protect my sources, but I also verify their credibility." Marcus had prepared for this moment, but it was still terrifying to reveal his identity to a stranger. He told Martinez about his job as a security guard, about finding the envelope in the wardrobe room, about the sleepless nights since making the discovery. He answered her questions about the building's security, about his access to the executive floors, about his background and motivations. Martinez listened carefully, occasionally taking notes, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated her experience with complex investigations. After an hour of conversation, she seemed satisfied with Marcus's credibility. "Marcus, what you've uncovered is potentially the biggest political scandal in our country's history, but investigating this story will put both of us in serious danger. These people have resources, connections, and a demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats. Are you prepared for what that means?" Marcus thought about Sarah and Emma and David, about the life they had built together, about everything he would be risking. Then he thought about the democracy they all depended on, about the trust that had been betrayed, about the future his children deserved. "I'm prepared," he said. Martinez reached into her briefcase and pulled out a digital recorder. "Then let's begin with your full statement. And Marcus, once we start this process, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Marcus Chen, night security guard, father, and reluctant hero, looked out at the quiet streets of Junction City and nodded. "I'm certain." As Martinez turned on the recorder, Marcus began to tell the complete story of what he had discovered in the king's robes, knowing that his words would soon change everything for everyone involved. The weeks following Marcus's meeting with Rebecca Martinez were a whirlwind of secret communications, careful planning, and mounting tension. Martinez had assembled a team of independent investigators, former intelligence analysts, and trusted contacts in law enforcement to verify and expand upon Marcus's evidence. Working with extreme caution, they confirmed the authenticity of the documents and recordings. More importantly, they began to uncover additional evidence that revealed the true scope of the Crown Protocol. The conspiracy wasn't limited to their country. It was an international network that had been manipulating democratic governments across 6 continents for more than 2 decades. Marcus continued working his security shifts, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while secretly serving as Martinez's inside source. Every night he searched for additional evidence, carefully photographing documents left in offices, noting suspicious meetings, and recording conversations he overheard during his rounds. The most significant breakthrough came 3 weeks after their initial meeting. While patrolling the 34th floor, Marcus discovered that a late-night meeting was taking place in the Prime Minister's private conference room. The attendees had left their electronic devices in a secure cabinet outside the room, as was protocol for highly classified discussions, but they hadn't considered that the building's aging ventilation system carried sound more efficiently than they realized. Marcus positioned himself in a maintenance closet adjacent to the conference room and activated a small digital recorder that Martinez had provided him. What he captured over the next 2 hours was devastating. The meeting included not just domestic officials, but representatives from similar operations in other countries. They discussed coordinating election interference across multiple nations, sharing strategies for media manipulation, and planning for what they called Phase 3 of their operation, the complete elimination of meaningful democratic participation in favor of managed political theater. Most chilling was their discussion of liability management. The coordinator's voice was cold and businesslike as he reviewed a list of journalists, activists, and government employees who had been asking inconvenient questions. Some had been neutralized through bribery or blackmail. Others had suffered convenient accidents or sudden illnesses. A few had simply disappeared. When the meeting ended and Marcus emerged from the maintenance closet, he was shaking. The scope of what he had uncovered was beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't just corruption, it was the systematic dismantling of democracy itself. Martinez's investigation moved into high gear after receiving this new evidence. Working with trusted contacts at major newspapers and television networks around the world, she began preparing for coordinated, simultaneous publication of the story. The plan was to release everything at once, making it impossible for the conspiracy to suppress the information or eliminate all the journalists involved. But as the publication date approached, Marcus began to notice disturbing changes in his routine. Cars that seemed to follow him to work, phone calls where no one spoke when he answered, maintenance workers in his apartment building who couldn't explain what they were fixing. Sarah noticed strangers watching their home. Emma mentioned that someone had been asking questions about her family at college. The conspiracy was closing in on them. Marcus met with Martinez one final time at a small cafe 50 miles from the city. She arrived looking haggard and nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. "They know," she said without preamble. "I'm not sure how, but they know we're on to them. 2 of my sources have gone silent, and one of my contacts at the Washington Herald was killed in a car accident yesterday. That's not a coincidence." Marcus felt his stomach drop. What about my family? They're being watched, but they haven't been approached directly yet. Marcus, we need to accelerate our timeline. The story has to break within the next 48 hours, or it may never break at all. What do you need from me? Martinez slid a thick envelope across the table. Everything you've gathered, all the original evidence, and your sworn affidavit. We're publishing simultaneously in 12 countries tomorrow at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. By the time they realize what's happening, the information will be everywhere. And after that, Marcus, your life changes forever. You'll be the most famous whistleblower in history, but you'll also be the most hunted. We've arranged for you and your family to enter witness protection immediately after publication. New identities, new location, new life. Marcus stared at the envelope, thinking about everything he was about to give up. His job, his home, his community, his identity, all sacrificed in the name of democracy and truth. But when he thought about the alternative, about living in a world where elections were meaningless, theater and powerful people could eliminate anyone who threatened their control, the choice became clear. My family doesn't know about the witness protection, Marcus said. Tell them tonight. We'll move you tomorrow afternoon, right after the story breaks. Pack only essential items. Leave everything else behind. The conversation that evening with Sarah, Emma, and David was the hardest of Marcus's life. He explained everything. The conspiracy, the evidence, the investigation, and the imminent publication of the story that would expose it all. He watched their faces change from confusion to disbelief to fear as they realized what his actions meant for their family. Dad, Emma said, her voice barely a whisper, you're going to be famous. Everyone will know your name. And everyone will want to kill him, Sarah added, her nurse's pragmatism cutting through any romantic notions about heroism. David, typically, asked the most thoughtful question. Do you really believe this will change anything? Even if the story comes out, even if people believe it, won't they just find new ways to do the same things? Marcus considered his son's question seriously. Maybe, probably. But David, if good people don't stand up when they have the chance, if we just accept that corruption and lies are normal, then we definitely lose. At least this way we have a fighting chance. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. At exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Time, Rebecca Martinez's story broke simultaneously across the globe. Within minutes, it was trending on every social media platform, being discussed on every news channel, and creating chaos in government offices around the world. The headline was simple but devastating. The Crown Protocol, how democracy was sold to the highest bidder. The story included everything Marcus had discovered, and more. Photographs of secret meetings, audio recordings of planning sessions, financial documents showing the flow of money, and testimony from sources in multiple countries. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus watched the coverage from his living room, surrounded by packed suitcases and his terrified family, as the Prime Minister appeared on television to deny all allegations. But even as the man spoke, news anchors were playing audio recordings of his voice discussing vote manipulation and journalist intimidation. The denials were worthless. Within hours, protesters had surrounded government buildings in the capital city and dozens of other locations. Opposition politicians, who had been silent or complicit, suddenly found their voices, calling for investigations and resignations. International leaders demanded explanations from their own governments as similar evidence emerged in their countries. At 2 p.m., exactly as planned, unmarked cars arrived at Marcus's apartment building. Federal agents, working under the direction of one of the few law enforcement officials Martinez trusted completely, escorted the Chen family to a secure location. As they drove away from the only home Emma and David had ever known, Marcus watched the city he had protected for years disappear behind them. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The Prime Minister resigned within a week, followed by dozens of other officials implicated in the conspiracy. Special prosecutors were appointed in 8 countries. The Crown Protocol became a household term synonymous with the betrayal of democratic values. But the story's impact went far beyond political resignations. The revelation that democracy itself had been compromised sparked a global movement for transparency and accountability. Young people like Emma, inspired by her father's courage, entered journalism and politics with renewed determination to protect democratic institutions. Voting rates increased dramatically as citizens realized how precious and fragile their rights really were. Marcus Chen never returned to his job as a security guard. Under his new identity in a small town far from the capital, he worked as a high school custodian, a job that reminded him daily of the importance of protecting institutions that serve the public good. Sarah found work at the local hospital, Emma transferred to a nearby college to continue her journalism studies, and David excelled in his new school's debate team, developing skills he said he wanted to use to become a lawyer who fought corruption. Late at night, when his family was asleep, Marcus sometimes wondered if he had made the right choice. They had given up everything, their home, their friends, their former lives, for the sake of principles that many people still didn't seem to value. The changes that followed the Crown Protocol revelations were significant, but corruption didn't disappear. New scandals emerged regularly. New conspiracies were uncovered. And sometimes, Marcus felt like they had won a single battle in an endless war. But then he would remember that night in the wardrobe room, holding evidence of a conspiracy that treated democracy like a commodity to be bought and sold. He would think about the casual way those powerful people had discussed eliminating anyone who threatened their control. He would consider what the world might have become if no one had been willing to speak up. Marcus Chen, the security guard who found something that changed everything, learned to live with his new identity and his old conscience. He had given up his name and his former life, but he had kept his integrity. In a world where democracy depends on ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it, that seemed like a fair trade. Years later, when historians wrote about the Crown Protocol and its exposure, they would focus on the political ramifications and international implications. But for Marcus Chen, the real victory was simpler and more personal. He had looked evil in the face and chosen not to look away. He had found the courage to do what was right, even when it cost him everything he thought he valued. And in the end, that courage changed the world.